Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Ackerman. We are back, and we could not be back at a better time because we have so much to cover this morning. Not just with Nikki Haley upended yesterday in Nevada with the none of these candidates vote, defeating her 60%. She was at 32%. We're going to talk about that in depth. Obviously, Mayorkas impeachment failing, what that means for Mike Johnson, what the future holds for him. Also, we're going to be talking about the rumor. I shouldn't give all this away, should I? Already? But Ronna McDaniel signaling that she'll resign after the South Carolina primary from being RNC chairwoman. We're going to talk about those in depth. We have a couple New York State issues. As always, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. Reach out at any time. We already have virtual waves coming in like mad, but feel free to comment on these topics as we get into them. And I do have a couple. I hope we can get to the New York State issues because just a couple interesting ones, a little bit off the beaten path. But first, as I said, President Biden emerged victorious in Nevada's Democrat primary Tuesday. Not really a surprise there. Now, Nikki Haley suffered what? If it weren't Nikki Haley, most media outlets would be calling it a humiliating defeat. But obviously, because she's the only one left that's not Trump, the media still, I actually have a piece here talking about don't give up on her yet kind of idea. But she suffered a humiliating defeat in the Republican contest where former President Donald Trump's name wasn't even on the ballot. Keep that in mind. Now, when I say I should take a step back because I don't want it to look as if I'm attacking Nikki Haley. It's just interesting. You've heard me say it a million times, but when the media props up somebody that's a Republican, I always watch that closely, and that's what we've been seeing with Nikki Haley. Now it is Trump, Haley. That's it. So they really have to put all their eggs in one basket because of their dislike or hatred, if you will, of the former president. Haley was, let me take a step back. None of these candidates, which you could actually fill out, none of these candidates was a top vote getter on the GOP side of the bill, with the option receiving more than 60%. I think I saw it at 62.1 or 62.9 of the vote, where the race was called by the Associated Press. Haley was the only major GOP candidate signed up for the Republican primary. Now, this all gets a little bit wonky, why that is, but the primary has no delegates at stake. Over the state GOP-run caucus, which will be held tomorrow, and has 26 delegates up for grabs. Now, if you look at the polls there, it looks as if the former president should run away with it, as Nikki Haley is not on that ballot. Facing virtually no competition, Haley only amassed 33.2% of the vote in a contest marked by low turnout. I would have to say I was a little surprised by this. And I can't imagine they were expecting this, that she would be defeated, humiliated, if you will, by essentially a none of the above. Wasn't that the plot of Brewster's Million? You remember that? Richard Pryor and John Candy vote for none of the above. But Trump, 77, is expected to win Thursday's Silver State Caucus and add to his delegate tally ahead of the South Carolina primary, where he leads in the polls by 27 points, according to Real Clear Politics. Wow. Meanwhile, Biden added to his delegate count after receiving 90% support in the race just after midnight Eastern Time, breezing past his long shot opponents and positioning himself to secure most, if not all, of the state's 36 Democrat delegates. Now, none of the above, or none of the candidates, actually received the second most votes after Biden at 5.7%. And then Marianne Williamson finished third with about 2.5%. Now, if you're wondering, which probably no one is, where did Dean Phillips finish? He's still in the race. He was not on the ballot. He didn't make it in time for the October 16th deadline. So there's your quick update on it. We're going to get a little more in-depth with it. I just wanted to pass along the beginnings of it to you. And as I said, we are going to talk about Mayorkas. Yeah, Mayorkas. What did I just say? that was not, I don't think, what many expected from that impeachment vote. Obviously, you wouldn't take it to the floor if you didn't think you had the votes, and they did not because of some last-minute surprise guests, some last-minute switches from Republican side. So we'll talk about that sometime in the program. So stay with us. This is our first break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Acom. This is Frankly Speaking. So back to just quickly, Nevada and last night. Voters casting ballots in the primary. This is where it gets a little wonky, but bear with me. Couldn't write in Trump's name, but they could vote for, quote, none of these candidates. And Trump supporters told Fox News that that's exactly how they voted. While Trump, the commanding frontrunner for the 2024 GOP nomination, as he makes his third straight White House run, wasn't on the primary ballot, just to make matters worse. So Haley was, and Trump wasn't. His name will be listed in the caucus tomorrow night, where 26 delegates are up for grabs, as I mentioned earlier. Now, the confusion over having two competing contests dates back to 2021, when Democrats, who at the time controlled the Nevada governor's office and the legislature, passed a law changing the presidential nominating contest from long-held caucuses to a state-run primary. And this is being reported on by Fox. The Nevada GOP objected, but last year the legal bid to stop the primary from going forward was rejected. In a twist, the judge in the case allowed the state Republicans to hold their own caucuses. No delegate will be at stake in the Republican primary, while all 26, as I mentioned, will be up for grabs in the caucus. The state GOP ruled that candidates, this was important, that put their name on the state-run primary ballot could not take part in the caucuses. Now, Haley and some other now defunct candidates who did not make it any further said it wasn't worth it for them because they believe that Nevada's GOP was, so loyal to Trump. So they decided to skip a caucus they believed was tipped in the favor of the former president. Now, Trump and again, she lost about 63% to none of these candidates to her 30%. Trump took to Truth Social last night, saying a bad night for Nikki Haley, losing by almost 30 points in Nevada to none of these candidates. Watch. She'll soon claim victory. Yeah, I would say if the shoe was on the other foot or if it was anybody other than Nikki Haley, the focus by the media would be on the quote-unquote humiliation and how embarrassing this is for her. Now, of course, her campaign can twist it and say it was all about the rule changes and like that, but this really is a much bigger headline than it's actually getting. Because if you think about even when she lost the last races, they still made it sound as if she did better than expected or not as bad as expected, something like that. This one you cannot spin. But I tied this in, and I mentioned it earlier. Well, I got to take a break. But just a little bit of the defense of Nikki Haley still, and then we've got a lot more to get to. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but please weigh in. What do you think? I mean, Nikki Haley's going to be in South Carolina, it looks like, and then she wants to go to Super Tuesday, so we will keep a close eye on that. But we'll take a short break, and then we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Oh, look at that beautiful view, as always. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. This is the piece I was highlighting earlier, or mentioning, I should say, which is kind of the scare tactics out there to convince you to at least give Nikki Haley a shot. So coming from Isaac Shore, who I've mentioned in the past, he writes for the New York Post. He's not the biggest Trump person, as I think you'll see in a little bit. But if Trump is convicted, an election win evaporates for Republicans. There is no more painful pang than that felt by those who entered the arena as a favorite only to leave shell-shocked. Remember the looks on everyone's faces at Hillary Clinton's election night extravaganza back in 2016? 8 years later, it looks increasingly like Republicans may experience the same sort of unhappy surprise come November. Now, again, this is Isaac Shore, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Former President Trump is seemingly on a glide path to reprise his role as a standard bearer, and Trump supporters are bullish on his chance of reprising his role as commander-in-chief. After all, Trump has built up a healthy lead over Biden in the bulk of national and swing state polls conducted over the last few months. But make no mistake, Isaac Shore says, the Trump train's check engine light is on. Not because it's beset by just one small defect, it's plagued by irreputable ones. At the root of all of these problems are Trump's legal issues. And without getting into any more of this, because that's really what the whole piece is about, it's interesting because a Trump supporter would read this. I'm going to give both sides to it. A Trump supporter would read this and say, so what you're suggesting is maybe go with a Nikki Haley to reward, what's the term he would use, the swamp or the deep state's attack on the former president. That's what Trump supporters would say. Non-Trump supporters are saying, we want Nikki Haley. We want the kind of the old, we get to pick Romney, we get to pick Dole, we get to pick McCain. So he boils it down to this. Nikki Haley is a capable conservative leader running an energetic campaign, telling voters the truth about Trump's defects, and lapping Biden. Whereas Trump only edges him out, and even then, conditionally, in the polls. And they've been telling us that for a long time. Hold on, I'm going to go on, not a tangent here, but that Nikki Haley would just destroy Biden, according to the polls. But if that's the case, I mean, how do you lose? I know Nevada's a one-off, but you lose to any other candidate? I mean, being beat pretty handily by former President Trump. But continuing. Those who understand the election stakes ought to reconsider casting her aside to coronate a walking, talking political liability. That's also very reminiscent of 2016, isn't it? We need to pick at one time it was Jeb Bush. I remember they also wanted Chris Christie at one point, saying, we can't have this liability. We can't have, at that point, he was going to be a Democrat, we were told. Now we're being told that he's a liability. Just very reminiscent. I guess some things never change. But because for Republicans, the worst part about falling in November would be they willingly chose to do so. So that's Isaac Shore. I'd love to hear your opinion on that. I think we will see a little bit more of that. I've got to believe the kind of never Trump people, both in the Republican Party, but also in the media, are going to start throwing out last-ditch efforts to save what they hope is Nikki Haley presidency or at least nomination. Boy, if she loses in her own home state, that's why even one of her mega donors said there's no upside for her going to South Carolina with what the polls are showing now and what's happened thus far. Because if she does have, I mean, she's young. If she wants a political future, maybe a different presidential run, I just don't think you want to get defeated badly, which the polls show that she could lose by what did I say earlier, 27%. Now, I know they're polls, so we always take them with a grain of salt, and they're not gospel, obviously, and very often used to manipulate. But still, at some point, you've got to say, man, I don't know if I want that liability, that kind of that cloud over my head for the rest of my political career. So enough on Nevada and kind of just that part of the race in general. I mentioned this earlier. How am I doing on time? I'm doing just fine. Yes, okay, there it was. Someone just messaged that said Haley is a hack. Okay, but she did get defeated by none of these choices, which was a choice, ironically. None of these choices in the Nevada primary. So none of these candidates receiving 62.9%. Okay, I was thinking it was almost 63. And Nikki Haley, none of these candidates won 62.9, and Nikki Haley getting 30.8 is right around the numbers I saw this morning. So yes, in a different world, the media would be telling you that it was a humiliating defeat. but it isn't. It is not a different world. I think the coverage has not been a surprise. I want to mention this one before we take another short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this, but McDaniel is going to step down as chairwoman of the RNC. That's what we are learning this morning. That's pretty big news. Some would say a long time coming, not necessarily because she's done a bad job necessarily, but there's been a lot of calls for that for a while, that she's just not at the level we need to be as you look at some of the House races and like that in the past. So we're going to talk about that when we get back, but I don't want to run too far behind. Thanks for joining us this morning on Frankly Speaking. We'll be right back after this short break. Thank you again for joining us here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. So as I mentioned before we went to break, McDaniel plans to step down. That's according to some sources and what they told the Associated Press. Now, Trump is expected to back, if this is the case, Trump is expected to back North Carolina Republican Party Chairman Michael Whately as McDaniel's replacement after the South Carolina primary. That's what's been signaled, that she will step down or resign after the South Carolina primary. The former president and GOP primary frontrunner hinted on Monday that McDaniel should vacate her position after the RNC reported decade-low fundraising numbers. Yeah, the numbers are dismal. We'll get to that in a moment. I think she knows that. I think she understands that, Trump said. Trump also teased in a Truth Social post that he'll be, quote, making a decision the day after the South Carolina primary as to my recommendations for RNC growth. And he called McDaniel a friend and praised her work in Michigan during his 2016 election victory over Hillary Clinton. Now listen to these numbers. According to the Federal Election Commission filing, the RNC had just $8 million in cash on hand as of the end of last year, December 31st. That's the lowest since it had just over $5 million in cash on hand at the end of 2014. Now, to put that into context, Trump's campaign finished off last year with $42 million cash on hand. So I wanted to pass that information. That kind of broke not that long ago. It might have been last night, or I started to see the articles this morning. What do you think? I mean, I guess probably a lot of people don't have a strong opinion about McDaniel. She started out great guns. Some have, with the underperformance in the last three contests, 3 consecutive election cycles, her underperformance has led to kind of a pushback against her. But at first, everybody seemed to like her. Does this make a real difference to you? I'll put that out to you. You see the number on the bottom of your screen. So I know I've kind of, I didn't bury the lead. We've covered all these stories are very important, all breaking. But the House did fail to impeach Mayorkas yesterday. This is not good. 216 to 214. What I mean why it's not good is the optics. All the articles this morning kind of ignoring what happened to Nikki Haley, and in this case saying that chaos, Republicans are chaos, they can't govern. And there's maybe a point to that at this stage. Yes, 216 to 214 vote against impeachment. Representatives Ken Buck and Tom McClintock announced before the vote that they would vote against impeachment. It was well known, those are both Republicans. And they were joined by Representative Mike Gallagher in voting with the Unified Democrats. You notice that's always the case. It's always Unified Democrats, not always the other way around. Hold on. Excuse me. So after the vote was decided, Representative Blake Moore voted nay, and they started running with the headline that, he changed at the last minute. See how much chaos there is. See how much disruption. That was for procedural reasons. And that was so that they could re-vote on it. And I know it's going to be difficult for him to explain that to some people, but that is why he did it, because it was tied up 215 to 215. He switched his vote so that it wouldn't just die there on the floor. But when you take a look at the other gentlemen, Republican Representatives Ken Buck and Tom McClintock, that voted against the impeachment, it should be noted that Buck announced this year is his final term and has openly expressed a desire to work for MSNBC or CNN. Now, McClintock said he believes the impeachment is unconstitutional, and both were seen as unmovable. They didn't even attempt. Really, the big surprise was Al Green showing up. They did not believe he'd be able to vote. He had emergency surgery, and then he showed up in his hospital gown, barefoot, to vote, Democrat Al Green. So that was one of the surprises that tipped it over against impeachment. How am I doing? I just don't want to run too late here. So again, the headline is it's just interesting to see. Nikki Haley, it's not embarrassing or it's not anything like that or humiliating in most outlets that you go to. But in this case, everything is about Republican embarrassment. I was going to actually show you, not that this is the exact piece I speak of. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, there we go. GOP erupts in fury over embarrassing and shameful defeat. Yes, because there's another bill, the Israel bill, that we'll get to as well. But this is what the mainstream media is running with this morning. And I've got to say, it is to the point where it is a little embarrassing. It's hard to explain failure after failure. What does this mean for Johnson? I think that's a great question. A lot of people are asking that on both sides of the aisle. House Republicans were exasperated and angst boiled over. Someone got a thesaurus on Tuesday as votes to impeach Mayorkas and pass an Israel aid package went down in defeat, both of them. Now, it's a part of a broader pattern, according to Axios, part of a broader pattern of House Republican leadership struggling to pass measures through the narrowly divided chamber, due in large part to their sharply divided conference. Quote, I knew that we would have the ability to block the Democrat agenda, said Representative Ryan Zink. We've exceeded my wildest expectations on blocking because we not only are blocking the Democrats' agenda, we block the Republican agenda. Ryan Zink, Republican from Montana. That is a really good point. I can understand the anger and the reason to be upset. We don't have command of the field, Zink said. Mike Gallagher said creating a new lower standard for impeachment won't secure the border. That's Mike Gallagher, who voted against impeachment. I'm frustrated, said Representative Corey Mills from Florida. There's a plethora of reasoning and justification and evidence. I just don't understand why we can't do the one thing the American people want. Yeah, and that I think is really one of the most troubling parts of it is poll after poll shows that the number one issue for voters, what concerns them, is immigration. So this was, for Republicans, kind of a winning argument that, again, somehow, and I know that's what happens when you have a slim majority, but it seems to be every time. Well, and it's also the frustration. I think that's why you'll see more calls on Johnson to be removed, because you're not supposed to take these bills unless you think you're going to get them through. Now, this was kind of a unique one, especially with Al Green and the like there. But now the Israel bill, which failed to garner the 2/3 majority it needed to pass, spawned its own set of GOP anger as the Senate also struggles to pass a bill to fund Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and border security. The two outcomes have lawmakers criticizing leadership's general strategy and questioning why bills are being brought to the floor without the votes to pass. Representative Mario Diaz-Balart said it's never good to bring something like that to the floor if it's going to fail. Mills said he is not in the discussion with leadership on why they choose to do it this way. I personally wouldn't have done this. Now, Republicans suggest, and that's why the one gentleman switched his vote so it could be put up to another vote, because House Majority Steve Scalise, or not, I don't know why I said House Majority, but Steve Scalise was out because of that cancer treatment, which I'm sure you've heard about. He was absent as he recovers from cancer treatment. It'll be brought back to another vote, but does that have the teeth? I mean, this was a historic impeachment. There's no denying that, and it failed. It's frustrating. If Scalise comes in tomorrow, then we'll get the vote. So I think it's just kind of delays this, said Eric Burleson from Missouri. So that's kind of a quick overview, 216 to 214. Mayorkas, and this is what I mean, the historical nature of it. Mayorkas would have just been the second cabinet official ever to be impeached, and the first since Secretary of War William Belknap in 1876, who resigned while facing allegations of corruption. So again, I want to highlight this. Representative Ken Buck, Tom McClintock, and Mike Gallagher initially joined with the Democrats in opposing impeachment, with the pro-Mayorkas forces helped by a surprise appearance of Representative Al Green, who had missed earlier votes due to surgery and arrived shortly before the vote in a wheelchair. With the vote count even at 215, meaning the resolution was, of course, to fail, Democrat lawmakers heckled their Republican colleagues with cries of order as the clock ticked down. You ever watch C-SPAN when they're having these votes? I guess you could say pomp and circumstance, or I don't know how a lot of this kind of circus atmosphere, I suppose. GOP conference chair, vice chair Blake Moore brought the drama to an end by flipping his vote from yay to nay, drawing cheers from the Democrat side of the aisle, though the Utah Republican had made the switch to join the majority and offer a motion to reconsider, which was postponed until a future date, probably when Scalise gets back. With Scalise's absence, reducing the GOP majority to 218-212 entering the day, House Republicans could only afford to lose 2 members' votes and impeach Mayorkas. What do you think this says about House Speaker Mike Johnson? Now, Johnson did say, I don't believe there's ever been a cabinet secretary who was so blatantly, openly, willfully, and without remorse did exactly the opposite of what the federal law requires him to do. Adding that while impeachment was an extreme measure, extreme times call for extreme measures. Do you think he's safe? House Speaker Mike Johnson. I know the one argument is no one else wants it, and there might be a point to that. I think there's people that obviously want it, but could they get the vote? That was, well, I can't remember what the exact quote was, but no one knew if they liked him or disliked Mike Johnson, so they voted for him as compared to all the people they disliked. It was kind of the idea at the time. I don't know if he's in over his head a little bit or if it's just the nature of what we're dealing with as Republicans with the different factions, which I think it's more that than anything, that this is becoming quite an embarrassment. And I only say embarrassment because the media can run with it that way. You know, look at this headline. How a botched impeachment laid bare a GOP House that cannot function. So then they get these great pieces about Republican dysfunction, hoping that come November, Republicans will get voted out for this dysfunction. That's why it's so frustrating to watch. But we've got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. Received a few comments from viewers. I'm appalled that a Democrat-controlled Congress can falsely impeach a sitting president twice and then vote not to impeach a regime member for obvious crimes and dereliction of duty. Shameful. Thank you for that. Then we have some other names that some others have called as well. Hey, keep up the great work with actual story reporting. Most mainstream reporters are terrible. Hey, thank you. Okay. Trump is crushing Biden in small dollar donations as Biden courts the wealthy. Yeah, I mean, imagine that fundraiser. Well, I know. Let me think about this because I vowed that I would never talk about this level of this person because you get it everywhere else, and we are trying to report on the news. But where all this controversy grew, where they said Republicans hate Taylor Swift now, it's not that. There was reports out that Biden was trying to court Taylor Swift because she's so popular right now and trying to get that vote. That's where that came from. But the reason I mentioned that is that points to what this viewer is saying. You know, that's why they're going to hold that big fundraiser with the former presidents, with with Biden, and then the former presidents Clinton and Obama, which I thought was really interesting because I did not think that Clinton was someone you really had at fundraisers anymore. And that's not knocking him. I just thought after Me Too and there's some pushback with him that wasn't a frequent invitee in some circles. But, so yes, he is courting that big money. So back to the vote. Now, are we good on the vote? I think well, as I mentioned, it's ripe for the media. How a botched impeachment laid bare a GOP House that cannot function. Once Mike Johnson's speakership was merely implausible, now it looks incompetent. How do you like that headline from Stephen Collinson from CNN? And not even headline, that's the first sentence. The rookie Republican leader already struggling to wield a tiny, extreme, and malfunctioning majority suffered a spectacular embarrassment on Tuesday night and a failed vote to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. Wow, there's a lot of hyperbole and a lot of tough talk there from Collinson. It told a story of a house in utter disarray. I'm just giving you some highlights. Setting up a high-stakes televised tour de force for the impeachment of a cabinet official for only the second time in history was a daring act, but failing to actually pull it off by a couple of votes broke the cardinal rule of not putting a bill up on the floor until the numbers are rock solid. The result was a debacle that made the House leadership a laughingstock. Wow. This is being reported as news at CNN. Listen, I'm not happy with the way it went, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of language here trying to convince you that everything is not okay, that everything, look, you can't ever vote for Republican again. That kind of storyline. These are the same people writing us articles that tell us that Nikki Haley is the only one that can win. But anyway, the failure played into the hands of a White House that delights in portraying Johnson's majority as an engine for the Donald Trump political stunt more than a serious governing force, and it raised serious doubts over the GOP's capacity to pull off another political maneuver designed to please the former president, and impeachment of President Joe Biden. Well, yeah, there's always that question there too. But anyway, you get the idea. And I'm not telling you anything you didn't already know, how the media uses this and loves it. You know, we joked about, not even joke, just highlight in the past everything about chaos, right? We got a couple of quick things I want to get to and kind of jump around. We got to take a few last minute breaks. We have a couple local issues that we'll highlight and some New York issues and maybe two other, a few other stories. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. Thanks so much for joining us. We're broadcasting live from the Heselson studio. Boy, we've covered a lot this morning. And I appreciate everybody who's been a part of the conversation. If you're new to the show, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. You can always reach out. I can't get to everything all the time. I did receive one from a viewer I've got to look into a little bit more. That's always the case. If there's a question being asked about something that hasn't been highlighted yet. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the messages. Before we get back into it, I wanted to highlight this for you. Assemblyman Palmisano has announced a scholarship opportunity, and I want to, of course, help students that want to get into college. And if you look at the cost of that, we've had our conversations on this program numerous times. If it's worth the cost, we won't have that argument here today. But I want to announce this because the deadline is coming up on Friday, March the 15th. So pass this along to anyone you know that is interested. It's four $3,000 scholarships, 2 academic and 2 athletic, as you see there. The Assemblyman said this is an excellent scholarship opportunity for high school seniors and college students in the 132nd Assembly District who have worked hard, distinguished themselves from their peers, and intend to pursue higher education. With college costs continually rising, this is a chance to lessen the financial burden that is a concern for so many young people and their families. I encourage eligible students in my district to apply. Now, here's what you need to know. As I keep the website up for just a moment, applicants should have a grade point average of 85 or higher, be active in community service and extracurricular activities, and demonstrate financial need. In addition to these qualifications, students applying for an athletic scholarship must also be involved in an organized sport or sports, one or the other. Applicants need not to be of Italian-American heritage to apply. Scholarship recipients will be announced in April, and the winner will be honored at a ceremony in Albany. So I want to make sure that you got that information. Okay. So Ted Cruz says it's time for McConnell to step down as a GOP leader. That's been something that's kind of been batted around for a little while, especially when he had those health issues not that long ago. Ted Cruz, pointing to what he called the mismanagement of a border security and Ukraine funding package, said yesterday that it's time for Senator Mitch McConnell to step down as the Senate GOP leader. Cruz is one of 10 Republican senators who voted against McConnell's re-election as Senate Minority Leader after the 2022 election. And he's a longtime critic of McConnell's leadership. And that is something I should have probably highlighted at the beginning of this, that he has kind of signaled this in the past. While Cruz's desire to replace McConnell as leader isn't new, he has stepped up his criticism in anticipation that the border security deal negotiated by Senator James Lankford, whom McConnell tapped for the task, would fall flat with GOP senators. Asked at a press conference whether it's time for McConnell to go, Cruz replied, "I think it is." Everyone else has also supported, Everyone here also supported to the leadership challenge to Mitch McConnell in November. He said at a press conference with Rick Scott, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson, J.D. Vance, Roger Marshall, and Eric Schmidt. "I think a Republican leader should actually lead this conference and should advance the priorities of Republicans," he said. Oof. Now, they did ask McConnell, kind of McConnell's typical deadpan humor, said, "I think we can all agree that Senator Cruz is not a fan." Cruz earlier Tuesday said he urged Senate Republicans after the 2022 election to elect a new leader after Republicans lost the Senate race in Pennsylvania and saw their minority shrink to 49. Quote, "We lost the seat in the Senate and we barely got a majority in the House. And I stood up and said, in any ordinary organization," I think Cruz has a point here, "when you're faced with failure, if you're running a business and you lose $50 million, you just don't say, everything's great, let's keep doing it. No, you sit down and say, what are we doing wrong?" So I don't know if anything will come from that. It just kind of piqued my interest this morning. I've got to take another short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. I received a comment. I have not had a chance to watch it, saying Tucker Carlson having that interview with Vladimir Putin. I think he explains in that video why he is doing so. I saw, obviously, the headlines on that. I did not watch the video. I find that interesting. I don't find that necessarily a good thing. But I'd love to hear from you on it, because there's people out there that are more versed on it than me. I know we have some big fans of Tucker. We have some people that aren't crazy about him. So what does that mean, him interviewing Vladimir Putin? Okay, I'm going to have to take another short break in just a moment. But before that, we have two New York State issues when we wrap up. I wanted to mention this piece, and we won't have the chance to get into all of it, but it's kind of interesting. It's by Jonathan Chesner at the New York Post, if you're interested. It's called "The Middle East Could Get Even Uglier, with Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah ready to wage war on Israel." It's about a 4-piece page. It gets, Washington must ensure the Israelis have all the ammunition and weapons they need to win. The clock is ticking. Yes, and that's why the bill yesterday was frustrating. Well, that for many reasons. I don't want to run too late. How are we doing? We've got some guests coming up towards the end of the week. I'll keep you updated. I don't have my calendar in front of me this morning, but we do have a guest on Thursday, tomorrow, and Friday. And we've got some special programming announcements that I'll be making on the show in the next few days. But we do have to take our last break. Then we're going to wrap things up. We've covered so much this morning. I can't believe how much we were able to get to. Please get your last minute's comments in so I can read as many of them as I can. If you're new to the show, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. Just reach out there, leave a voicemail or text, and we'll do the best we can to get to that before the program's over. And I'd love to hear your take on Tucker interviewing Putin. We'll take our last break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking. Wrapping things up here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you to so many people who joined us this morning, all the waves and all the comments. I do appreciate it. All right, as we wrap up, Cuomo, yes, former governor, disgraced former governor, Andrew Cuomo has asked the U.S. Attorney General to examine the probe of his case. Remember, we had that piece for you last week suggesting that he should run again so that he could tell his side to the story. And they didn't say necessarily for governor, but just run for election. Attorneys for Andrew M. Cuomo sent a letter to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland this week requesting his office conduct an internal review of the deeply flawed, that's they're in quotes, investigation that found the former governor had, quote, engaged in a pattern or practice of sexual harassment and retaliation. Cuomo's attorneys also requested a meeting with Garland to, quote, discuss the deeply troubling circumstances leading to the agreement between the Justice Department and New York Governor's Office that resulted from the federal investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn and the federal agency's Civil Rights Division. I think this is interesting because he clearly wants to run for something, right? Whatever that is. I don't know, maybe governor again, maybe mayor. But it seems like when he starts to get vocal, something else comes out. This happened the other week where he had an opinion piece out about how Democrats have to do better about immigration. It was a little ahead of the curve on that. Now you see Democrats running. So I will give him credit for that, a little ahead of the curve. And it was, what, a day later, 2 days later, where this investigation was released, the results of this quote-unquote investigation. So that's one that we'll be watching closely because there has been some criticism about the lack of information and kind of the trial by public opinion almost in a way. A spokeswoman for James said Andrew Cuomo can continue to deny the truth and attack these women, but the facts do not lie. That's the state attorney general, Letitia James. All right, there we go. And the final New York State issue for all of our Second Amendment activists. Gun rights advocates are suing over New York's concealed carry law. Out-of-state gun owners filed a federal lawsuit on Monday in the U.S. District Court in Albany, arguing that the state's ban on concealed carry permits for non-New Yorkers violates their Second Amendment rights. The lawsuit, filed by the Gun Owners of America and the Gun Owners Foundation, lists a Connecticut resident who hosts a show on Newsmax alongside two Massachusetts men as plaintiffs. Just wanted to pass that along to you. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Again, thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll be back tomorrow morning. I do have guests tomorrow and Friday, so make sure that you tune in each day. This has been Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV Big Fox. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early. Plenty that we'll have to talk about, so don't miss even a second. It's going to be back. We'll see you tomorrow morning.